Welcome to CMO Journeys, where we sit down with the marketing leaders shaping some of today's most innovative brands. I'm Christian Banach, and I explore the stories behind the CMOs, how they lead, how they grow, and how they think about partnering with agencies. Appriss Retail helps the world's largest retailers reduce fraud, manage returns, and protect profit across both in-store and online channels. It sits at the center of huge retail shifts happening right now, where margin pressure, customer experience, and data-driven decision-making all collide. Sarah Cascone is the company's first chief marketing officer, coming in after scaling a high-growth retail company from early days to nearly $100 million in revenue. And now she's tasked with reframing how an entire category shows up in the market. Sarah, welcome to CMO Journeys.
Thank you.
So when you look back at your career, it doesn't follow a straight traditional marketing path. How do you think about the different chapters that led you to where you're at here today?
Yeah, so early chapter was with Worldwide Business Research. It was essentially a market company, did conferences in a bunch of different industries, and outside of honestly learning what it was to exist in the workforce full-time after college, I was really exposed to a lot of different industries quickly and learned how to plan and execute a compelling conference from the ground up. So this was really I would say my first exposure to how messaging, experience, and audience all connect. At Bluecore, the early days there were really about learning SaaS and marketing fundamentals. And over time, it became a lesson in how marketing has to change at every inflection point of the business. Having been there 10 years, you experience a lot of change. And that really shaped how I think about building a durable go-to-market engine in a very competitive environment. That brings me to my current chapter, which is really taking those learnings and shaping a narrative for a different angle of retail, still inside tech, but inside a much more complex enterprise context. I would say every chapter really sharpened my ability to prioritize and move fast under constraint.
Sure. Yeah. Let's take it a step back even further before you got into the workforce. Tell us a little bit about maybe where you grew up, where you went to school. Did you see yourself in marketing?
Yeah, so I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I did not see myself in marketing. I think when I went to college, I was a psych major and I thought I wanted to be a criminal psychologist. And it's kind of interesting, I guess, because psychology really does go hand in hand with marketing. I didn't go the, criminologist route because I thought that would be a bit depressing day to day. So I ended up in college heavily involved in events and conferences. And I think that was my first exposure to, oh, there's a whole world of this beyond like party planning, which I think when you think of events planning, that's what you think of. But there's this whole business side of it. And that kind of led me to my first role at WBR.
Yeah, love that. So as you mentioned, you started the career really in events and community building before really moving into deeper into growth and go-to-market leadership. What do you think you took away from that early chapter about events that you're bringing today?
So much. Events taught me, I would say, first and foremost, pattern recognition, what lands, what doesn't, and why. They also kept me really anchored in the fact that everyone is selling to a human being. So that in-person connection, being memorable, being real, and trustworthy isn't a nice to have in marketing. It really is foundational. And the expanded community aspect of that reinforced that even further. And it taught me, trust scales before pipeline does. So that still shows up in how I think about messaging, executive engagement, account-based marketing. If marketing doesn't work in a live conversation, it's not going to work in a campaign.
Yeah, I love that. So tell me a little bit about Bluecore now. You were there for a decade. There were multiple stages of growth. What was the inflection point where your role really evolved and how you're really thinking about marketing? Was there one kind of key moment or campaign or mentor or something?
Yeah, I think the inflection point for me was when I was finally running the entire function. We were around the 50 million in ARR range. And I had gradually gone from managing just events to picking up PR and then content and then design and then demand gen, then product marketing. And now I'm running the whole team and I have all the functions. And at that point, the job shifted to making sure all of those functions operated as one integrated engine. And marketing had to support quality pipeline growth and be deeply embedded in sales and customer success and the broader org. Especially with sales, we shared goals and accountability. So it was never about who's taking credit for what. It was about adjusting and scaling together to create healthy pipeline dynamics. So I think that was a big inflection point for me. And I did have many mentors along the way that helped me get to that point. I had many leaders who provided me with the opportunity to take on multiple functions and to start expanding my scope of marketing. So that opportunity I am forever grateful for. But I do think that inflection point was when, like, okay, wow, I have all these things here. How do I make them play together in unison and make sure it's affecting the business in a way that's obvious?
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned a lot of different people reporting into you. Where did the SDR function fit at Bluecore, and what's your perspective on where maybe it should?
Yes. So when I was running marketing initially, the SDR function sat in sales. Eventually, and in basically the last 2 years of my tenure at Bluecore, we shifted that org under marketing. And I do believe that's where it belongs when you have a marketing engine that is truly focused on pipeline generation. So we basically created or evolved rather that SDR function into, we're not just outbound cold calling, pounding the phones. We are this almost like executive concierge to the sales team, to the AEs. We are coming with the intel, with the relevant activations to be able to get the attention of an executive buyer. Bluecore sold into enterprise retail. Appriss sells into enterprise retail. So getting to a director and above contact who actually is a decision maker and has influence was crucial for our ability to drive pipeline and win deals. And that team became I would say, the coordination point of all of that, having the knowledge of all of what marketing is putting out there from a content, from an events, from a social perspective, and using that based on the intel we had on different accounts and contacts to drive meetings at the moment of intent. So I personally, having experienced both sides, believe the SDRs, I don't even call them SDRs anymore on my team. I have one, she's called a relationship development manager, because the whole point of her role is to start that relationship with the executive in an authentic and relevant way. And I think that belongs in marketing.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. I love that title as well. We talk a lot about here about relationship making is sort of our overall philosophy, and how do you build new relationships, and it can start, but if you're thinking of it in terms of you're trying to sell something, especially when you're talking enterprise, it gives a full sense of reality of how these deals are developed and made. So
Exactly.
love that, love that. So you're known as a direct communicator and a ruthless prioritizer. I believe I read that somewhere. Where did that mindset come from, and how did that get shaped over time?
Yes, I love this. So where to start? One, I would say speed forces clarity. And I've always moved fast. Part of that comes from growing up in a hectic household in Brooklyn and being exposed to the pace of city life early. But when you're under real revenue pressure, you don't have time for confusion or like politeness theater. I learned that direct communication is an efficiency strategy. And as I matured, I got more comfortable having tough conversations, giving clear feedback without demotivating people, and at the same time, modeling that openness when feedback came back to me. Prioritization became really my superpower because it had to. At the director level, the VP level, the C suite levels, you're constantly making bets and trade offs without perfect data. And decisiveness just has to be part of the job. And that's also something that instills confidence, not just in your peers, in your first team, but in the team that you're managing.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I think that's a good segue. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the current role you have now. So coming into Appriss Retail as the first CMO, what did you feel you had to get right versus what could wait?
Yeah, so there's three things that I wanted to get right. One was messaging and positioning, what we do, who it's for, and reframing our category as a P&L lever for our buyers, which it is. The second one was alignment with go-to-market on our growth motion. There's my dogs in the background. For us, that meant account-based marketing led and events first, because events were what is going to drive that pipeline, those qualified meetings. And the third piece there was making an honest assessment of whether I had the right talent in place to scale into the next chapter, which is always the hardest part, because you want to be thoughtful, but you also don't want to linger too long because the effectiveness of your strategy relies on the talent you have in house.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great point and well articulated there. What are you seeing is maybe taking up more of your attention right now than you had expected coming into the role?
Honestly, it's adjusting to CMO life. And that's more personal than it is tactical. I expected that there was going to be work and attention of shifting teams from feature talk to financial impact language. I expected that rebuilding the operating muscle across teams and being thoughtful about hiring was going to take a bunch of attention. What I didn't fully anticipate is how much attention I need to give to my own daily operating rhythm, the workload, the stress, the sustainability required at a C-suite level. There's just something different about shouldering an entire function. And I'm seeing more CMOs talk about this now, which is very refreshing. And I'm lucky. I have strong executive partners and a team that makes it worth it. But I would say that to me, it's literally, I'm 5 months into this role. It's only this month that I realized, oh, I need to be a little bit more cognizant of how this feels and how I adjust to make sure I'm taking care of myself so that I can show up for the team and the org.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great insight. I appreciate the vulnerability there. So I guess it kind of along the same vein then, what are you finding you're saying no to more often right now?
Saying no is probably one of my favorite things. And I think this goes with the whole ruthless prioritization characteristic. Definitely saying no to brand versus demand debates. I think it's a false binary. Instead, I like to look at how different activations are impacting different funnel metrics. So, for example, for us, MQAs are all about thought leadership and content and establishing our point of view there. So anything that feeds that gets laddered into that MQA metric, and I look at the effectiveness of the channels that way, the channels and the functions. SQAs are for us, SQAs and SQOs, where events play a heavy role in driving qualified meetings with executive buyers. So I like to kind of ladder up the different functions and activations under the metric they impact the most and look at it that way instead of brand versus demand, because in that way, brand's always going to end up getting cut. It is all one synchronous being. So that I definitely say no to. I say no to activity that doesn't move pipeline, accelerate it, or expand it. Yes, there is a little bit of budget and investment I have for experiments, but for the most part, 90% of what I invest in has to move pipeline. Oh God. And just like trend chasing and shiny objects, which is everywhere, especially in tech, especially in retail. If you are not being thoughtful about where your attention is being pulled and making sure there's a clear business case attached to it, then you're just going to be distracted all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Ruthless prioritizer. I love it.
Yes.
Tell us about the events strategy. Sounds like it's pretty central to what you do. Was that always the case there, or is this something new? How are you evolving that?
So before I came to Appriss, events were big. I would say the way the team went about it was much different. So what we came in with was a fresh perspective in how to create memorable activations that are more attractive to an executive buyer than they are a user. Because, yes, we absolutely need to be in touch with the user and make sure we understand their pains. But at the end of the day, if the executive doesn't see the value in what we're doing, the deal's never going to move. So, in that way, we are not just going to industry conferences where we have a strong ICP penetration, but we're showing up in ways that make us memorable and trustworthy. So we're doing after hours activations that maybe an executive wouldn't do on their own. We're not always doing the steakhouse, nice Michelin star dinners. Most executives can go and do that on their own. For example, we were just at NRF Big Show in January, and we took a bunch of executives to see the bull riding show at Madison Square Garden, which was so fun, has nothing to do with what we do as a business, but it was an opportunity to just get to know one another as humans and earn the right to have a conversation and ask them questions about their business. So we do things like that. We definitely like to be on stage when possible, talking about our point of view on what's happening in the industry in a way that's not salesy, making them come away with something that makes them rethink how they are tackling a certain problem. And I know we'll get into this later, but like how we tell the story and the content behind that is really, really important. I do use an agency for that. So I would say very focused on executive buyers, and the community piece is important too. So I separate out events and community. Events are, we're going to the industry conferences, we're doing some dinners, yada, yada. But then we have our owned communities. So we're about to launch our first executive community for VPs and above called the Take Back Talks. It's mostly virtual. Every other month, we have these behind closed door strategies on how um, retail executives who are tackling loss are addressing that problem and bringing subject matter experts to the table to discuss that. We very strategically schedule those in between big conferences and events so we can keep the conversation going naturally. And so the next step isn't always take a meeting with us. We want to tell you about what we do. It's we want to keep the conversation going to hear how you're tackling this problem, bring some insights for you, add some value without some obligation to take a sales meeting before we get to that point. Because when you do have the intent to buy, you'll buy. So that's our approach for events.
Yeah, I love that. So with the take back talks, are those prospects? Are those clients? Who's in the room?
It's both.
Yeah.
It's open to customers and prospects. And I ran something similar at Blue Core called the D2C Collective. And the idea is, yes, we are going to come with our insights as a tech provider in the space, but we also want to bring subject matter experts outside of ourselves to offer even more value, whether that's someone from one of the NRF councils or a former retail executive in the return space, or one of our customers coming to share a playbook. So we're always wanting to make sure that we are conveying, yes, we are experts in a certain area, but there are experts outside that we surround ourselves with to make sure we're bringing you the best of the best.
Yeah, yeah, I love that strategy. Very, very in line with what we advise clients as well. So you stepped into this role during a period of private equity ownership and leadership change as well. How does that context shape how you're prioritizing and making these decisions?
Yes. So because we're PE backed, it's not growth at all costs. Dollars are precious, which means CFO level scrutiny really matters. And having a shared measurement framework and visibility into decision making is critical. So, what I talked about earlier, as far as like how the different activations ladder up to the different funnel metrics, that's the kind of visibility I give my CMO. So, when I'm moving dollars around or I'm saying I'm shifting an investment from here to here, they understand why and they're invested in how we are making decisions and where we're putting our dollars. Um, I think in general, especially as a CMO, you have to know how your investments are impacting the P&L, which is exactly how it should be. And that's uncomfortable for some marketers, but I actually welcome it because it sharpens decisions and it forces focus on what truly matters.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that's a good segue. You mentioned agency partners. And I know we work a lot with agencies and really try to make sure that they're thinking about it, not just selling in their programs to the CMO, but also how is the CFO going to respond, to this as well, and have them have that mindset. But tell me a little bit about the team. What does the marketing team internally look like? What does your partnerships look like? How do you evaluate, when to bring in a partner versus build in house?
Yes. So we've got basically two pillars of the marketing team: product marketing and growth marketing. Product marketing is all about telling that compelling story in market. This is not just like the classic product marketing where it's messaging, positioning, sales enablement, product launches, but it's also the content, the thought leadership, and how basically that's going to translate across channels. The growth marketing is really the engine and the distribution of that story. So there is where I have my outbound functions, the relationship development manager. This is where event sits. I also have design in here. This is where the execution really comes to life and the measurement really comes to life. As far as where I partner, so I have a content agency that technically kind of sits under the product marketing pillar. They are absolutely my not so best kept secret. And I think for them, a big reason why I brought them in is I know where I don't have creative muscle and what truly makes an agency great from a content perspective. And so I use StoryArb. They're fairly new to the scene, but they are very good at real editorial, subject matter expert driven playbooks and newsletters. It's the kind of content people actually want to read. And so that's a big, big lever for me there. I also have a PR agency that is specifically focused in the retail sector. They are an amazing extension of getting that story out in press releases, in bylines, in commentary, in awards, in interviews. So product marketing has a strong agency foundation there. I would say most of my in-house expertise is on the growth marketing side. So I've got a director of growth, my events person, designer, relationship development manager. I do like to keep a lot of that in-house because a lot of it you can't outsource when it's so critical to how you're able to drive pipeline.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Makes sense. Great. Thanks for sharing that. So as you think about, as you know, there's a lot of agencies that listen to this, and in your role here or in the past roles that you've had, I'm sure agencies have tried to get your attention. What is something that actually gets your attention when somebody reaches out, and what's something that turns you off immediately?
Yeah, I would say coming with a point of view over telling me like your portfolio is big and tying that to clear evidence of understanding our business model. I can't tell you how many times I've had people reach out to me with an offer that is very clearly for a business that sells into SMB or mid market, which is a completely different motion than selling into enterprise. And it just shows you haven't done the work. And that also shows a lack of respect for my time. So I would say, yeah, coming with that point of view and you understand enterprise and where my pains are is really big.
Yeah, yeah. And do you find that a better path for agencies is to go direct to the CMO, or is it starting with the maybe more manager director level? Like how would you advise them to go that? Because I think there's two schools of thought there. Like go to the decision maker, and they can pull the trigger, but they're not maybe the ones that are doing the research. They don't have the time. Like and maybe even in your business, how you approach. I'd be curious, like how you think about it on your team, and also what you've seen work for you.
Yeah, I think it depends on the size of the problem you're offering to solve and how tactical it is. Um, if you're coming to talk to me about AEO and SEO, which clearly someone else on my team manages, like you're that to me doesn't signal respect for my time, especially in an enterprise business where those things are they're still important, but they're not as important as like an SMB high volume business where you're driving a lot of traffic to the website. To me, it's like you should have gone to my director of growth for that. So when and this is how we approach executives as well. What is the size of the problem? If I'm going to a CFO who we do sell into at Appriss, and I'm telling them I can put $10 million back to the bottom line of your P&L this year, that's a problem they might perk up to be more curious about. If you're saying I can save you 500 grand in the context of whatever, it's not a big enough of an issue and you're not respecting my time. So I think that's where agencies can sometimes go wrong. And I don't mind being the one they go to first or even in parallel to my team, but it has to be a significant enough issue for me. And like they have to recognize that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really smart way to look at it. I like that filter a lot. What would you say are, when you're working with partners, what separates the great ones from the ones that tend to struggle?
The great ones really become an extension of my team. They fully embed themselves, not just with my in house marketing team, but the broader org. They feel comfortable going to the CRO, going to the CPO. They literally are an extension of my team. And they deeply understand our strategy. It's reflected back in the work they do for us. And that collectively reduces my cognitive load. And if you can reduce an executive's cognitive load, oof, that's hard to put a dollar amount value on that. So I think it's a really important thing that agencies need to think about.
Yeah, I love that idea as well. So I'd like to shift gears a bit and go back to you. You live in New Jersey. You have two big dogs. You come up through a very hands-on career path. I know we heard one of those dogs earlier.
Yes.
What do you do outside of work that helps you reset, helps you reduce that cognitive load that you just mentioned?
Yeah. So sleep is my number one. If I don't get 8 hours of sleep, I'm cranky, I'm useless. So I do whatever I can to make sure that time is precious because I know it's so important, not just for my well being, but for how I show up for my team and for the company. Um, After that, I would say my number two is definitely my workout routine. I train multiple times a week. And I have to say, earlier in my career, this used to feel like a chore. Now I really welcome it because I feel how much it helps me regulate my stress. And I also do a very specific type of training that forces me to be present, which is very hard for me to do. I'm very fast moving. I'm always on to the next thing. But I do hard style and functional kettlebell training, which involves highly technical, complex movements and demands presence in thinking about multiple things at once while you're holding a heavy kettlebell sometimes above your head. So that really helps me regulate, slow down, reset, and really make sure I don't get hurt. So I need that. And my support system really matters. You mentioned my dogs, who of course had to bark during this recording, but between them, my two pit bulls, and my partner Matt, they ground me in ways that I can't even fully explain, and provide that anchor when everything is crazy at work.
Yeah, no, I love that. I find the same thing with working out. It's therapeutic in so many ways. So one last question before we wrap up here. I'd love to know what's something that you've had to unlearn now that you've moved more into these senior roles.
That's such a good question. Um, okay, two big things. Um, One, being indispensable. Business is business. And external pressure doesn't care how good you are or how well liked you are. And sometimes that's just an unfortunate part of life, but you learn from it. Um, Two, I would say assuming I know better than the person in front of me. There's so much knowledge that you accumulate as you kind of grow in your career, yes, but you also realize as you grow in your career how much more there is to learn and how little it feels like you know. So having that openness to realize I might not have the solution here, or this person might have input that's going to make my idea better, is just gold. And being able to put your ego aside and be collaborative in that way is an accelerator.
Yeah, no, I love that, and it's tough. It's tough. It's tough to do that at times, especially when you've been a high achiever, likely your whole life. So, Sarah, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for the conversation, the insights. To everyone else watching, don't forget to follow CMO Journeys for more conversations with marketing leaders that are shaping what's next. I'm Christian Banach. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.